There is a fundamental difference between podcasts that generate sales and those that just build an audience. And it has nothing to do with how many times you pitch on your show or how big your audience actually is. After generating $120,000 in profit in the last 9 months with my own podcast, I found 3 hidden psychological triggers and persuasion tactics that you can use to turn cold listeners into eager buyers without feeling like you're selling. And today I'm going to reveal all 3 so that you can make way more money way faster with your podcast. Number 1, the mere exposure effect. So look, in 1968, there was a psychologist known as Robert Zajonc. He ran a strange experiment. He showed a bunch of participants a bunch of unfamiliar faces and random Chinese characters they weren't exposed to before. Some people saw the image once, some twice, some 5 times, and some 20 times. And then at the end, he asked them to rate which ones they liked the most. And for some reason, it seemed like the students rated the faces that they had seen more often as the one that they liked the most. They felt like they were more trustworthy, and some even said that they thought they looked way more intelligent. But when they were asked why, they had no clue. They just supposedly felt more comfortable with what felt familiar. Now look, what the hell does this have to do with monetizing your podcast, right? This gives a very clear perspective as to why your audience might not buy from you for a long while, even though you're producing valuable content on a consistent basis. Because let's say, for example, you're constantly interviewing guests, or you have a very scattered content strategy and you're covering different frameworks, different strategies, different processes, and different ways to get to a desired outcome to get a particular result. You're not giving people and your listeners a chance to develop that familiarity with your messaging and your process, especially if you have a bunch of different guests who are coming onto the podcast and you're interviewing them. Again, every guest has a different message, has a different framework, has a different process. And if you're trying to sell something, your own process or your own program through your podcast, and people don't have that like, know, and trust with your particular process, they're never going to buy. So that's why it's so important for you as a podcast host to develop your core message, your philosophy, and your process to helping your audience get a particular result. And the more times you can instill and repeat those processes, the philosophy, and the way you get people results, the more aligned your audience will feel to you. The more they'll begin to trust you. So then when it comes to you saying, hey, buy my course, book a call, explore working with me, they are way more familiar and they're way more likely to take that next step. But if you don't do that, then they're far less likely to take that action. So develop your core message, understand what your process is, and don't worry about constantly repeating yourself. They need to hear the message more times than you can imagine in order for them to feel comfortable taking that next step and actually buying. Now, psychological trick number 2 is known as the foot in the door technique. So in 1966, 2 researchers known as Friedman and Fraser went door to door in a suburban neighborhood. First, they asked homeowners, do you support safe driving? And of course, everyone was like, yes, we do. They then asked a follow-up question, which was, hey, cool, I get you support, safe driving. So are you okay with just putting this tiny sticker that says safe driving on your window? Now, of course, most people, the majority of people said yes. And then 2 weeks later, they came back with a huge billboard that was super ugly. And they went to the same neighborhood and they asked people, are you okay if we put this big sign on your lawn? Now, what was crazy was the people who said yes to the tiny sticker 2 weeks earlier, they were 4 times more likely to say yes to the request, even though it was super intrusive and a massive, ugly sign. But why? Why did this happen? Well, this happens because something known as the foot in the door technique. When you get someone to say yes to a very small request, that's a way for you to get your foot in the door. But if that request has something to do with their identity, i.e. I'm someone who supports safe driving, when you follow up with a different request, i.e. can we put up this massive ugly sign in your front lawn because you're someone who supports safe driving, that person is way more likely to act in order to remain consistent with who they are or who they believe they are. That's why most people who said yes to the small request then said yes to the bigger request later. It just felt like it was consistent to their identity. Now, cool, but what does this have to do with you monetizing your podcast? Well, a simple way to start generating more sales from your podcast is by filling your episodes with mini yes moments. Not heavy sales pitch, just kind of like slight believe nudges. Now you can do this by asking very simple and rhetorical questions after you describe a process or a belief you have, or if you break down a framework or one of your philosophies. All you need to do is use phrases like this. Wouldn't it be cool if? Can you see how this would work for you? Isn't this a game changer? Pretty cool, right? Are you starting to understand this? And what you're doing is that you're getting, again, little micro yeses from your podcast listeners. It's making them more agreeable and is getting them into this state where they're like, yes, yes. And by the end, when you give a call to action to, let's say, take a lead magnet, join your email list, join your community, book a call, or to buy your stuff, they kind of feel like they are in alignment with you, your process. They see why it will benefit them. So saying yes becomes way easier. It just kind of feels in alignment with who they are because they are in alignment with your strategy, your process, your philosophy. And that makes saying yes to your next request way easier. So try to fill your episodes with many more micro yes moments to drive way more sales from your podcast. And then finally, psychological trick number 3 that you can use is what's known as narrative transportation. Super funky name, and honestly, I'm not too sure why it's even called this, but hey ho. So here's how it works. In 2000, psychologists Melanie Green and Tim Brock conducted a series of experiments around persuasion. They split their participants up into 2 groups, and one of the group kind of just read a bunch of analytical and logical information and facts around why smoking is bad and why smoking is dangerous. Whereas the other group of participants were kind of gave this article that shared a very emotional story of a lady that went through her backstory, her life, and how smoking completely destroyed her. It gave her cancer and ruined her life as well as her family's. And then at the end, they were asked, look, how dangerous do you think smoking is? And the story group rated that smoking was way more dangerous. They rated it way higher compared to the other group that read kind of the facts, the analytical stuff. But here's what's wild. When they were reading the story, they never felt at any point they were being sold an idea or a dream or something. They didn't feel like they were being persuaded. They just felt like they resonated way more with the story. They were transported into the character's life. So once again, what the hell does this have to do with you making way more money with your podcast? Simply put, it's fantastic to create value-based content, meaning educational content for your listeners. The how-tos, the tips, the listicles, the part that goes through in step-by-step how to get a desired outcome or how to solve a problem. However, if you want your audience to make a change, if you want them to be way more likely to take an action, to book a call, to make a purchase, just talking about the tips, the step-by-step, that's more tapping into the analytical mind, which doesn't always get them to buy. Whereas when you share more stories about how you overcame a particular challenge or about the before and after of one of your clients who were dealing with a particular struggle that they were facing, and then how they overcame it, how they felt internally and how the external world changed. When you use way more stories in your content, it's way easier for you to get your audience to remove their resistance to sales and actually take that next step to wanting to work with you. Because they just connect way more with stories. We all connect way more with stories. Hence why in this YouTube video, I haven't sat here and broke down the science and blah, 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 blah. Like, I've mixed the two. I've shared specific stories with you and then delivered the value. Because in my mind, I know it's going to help you understand the point I'm trying to make way more. And for your listeners, you want to teleport them into the story. You want them to feel like they're the main character. And when you're able to do this, the sale becomes way easier. They're no longer critiquing. They're no longer overanalyzing. They just start imagining what their lives could be if they were working with you, if they had a clear process, if they had a clear strategy. So look, there you have it. Those are 3 psychological tricks and persuasion tactics you can start using today, not to manipulate your audience, but simply to get them to take that next step with you, to buy way more, and to get them to take course action without that resistance. So that being said, I'll catch you in the next video.